Right, hello, greetings, and welcome back to the Philosophy Club here in sleepy central Gaul, Batet, where, like everywhere else, the centre of the universe. I think it was Plotinus, the great philosopher, who said that in an infinite universe, the centre is everywhere. Something to chew on that. But, so anyway, it's been quite an eventful week. I've been up to all kinds of stuff. I'll start, as usual, with a kind of summary of what I've been up to and philosophically share some of the things that have happened along the way. So I'm on the executive committee of the French National Committee for the Liberal Democrat Party, my political hat on. I think one should be active in. If you leave politics to the idiots, idiocy happens. I mean, so one has to make a stand. Anyway, so I'm in the middle of setting up and recreating something called the Liberal Democrat Philosophy Forum that I used to run when I lived in Montgomeryshire in Wales. I was friends with the then MP, who was a Liberal Democrat, good bloke, and I ran 30 meetings in the UK House of Lords. My mission was to get politicians talking about ideas, discussion. I feel that if you can only just like talk in a sensible way, then you don't deteriorate to idiocy and Trump-style grandstanding. And I think a friend of mine, Brian Vision-Dance, used to give out little cards at Stonehenge every summer solstice, which simply said, "There's nothing wrong with the world. We're just having a weird conversation." And that was his sense of humour. He was a Jewish hippie, a salt of the earth. He's dead now, sadly. Brian, hello. And yes, I think so. The idea is to get the conversation a bit more intelligent, and so that's what we'll be doing with the Lib Dem Philosophy Forum, which is going to be for Britain, for Wales, people wherever they are, and France. And we'll have speakers each term. We'll have one a term. So that'll be exciting. I've also been active with my dear friend in Canada, Satyen Raja, who is, doing great stuff. He told me he'd just been down to California to something called the Renaissance Weekend, which is for top chief executives, Nobel Prize winners, high-end kind of people, and he said it was very difficult because it's so polarised. American society has become like you're either with MAGA or you're against it, and they won't talk to each other. And they were apologising to him as a Canadian. They were saying, "We're sorry, Satyen, we love you in Canada. We don't understand what Trump is doing, trying to destroy your economy." And it's like America's gone mad. And so it was nice to check in with Satyen and get a report back. And we did some. He's a master of coaching and applying spiritual wisdom to solving difficult problems in a variety of settings. He's a top management guru, I suppose you'd call him. So that was good. I've also had a very interesting catch-up conversation with an old friend of mine, a Scottish chap who I knew way back when I lived in the castle in Scotland. He's a Scottish Muslim, graduate of the University of Edinburgh, highly intellectual, very learned in Islamic philosophy, but he's very active. He runs a thing called Global Vision 2000, which I've been part of. And we're going to do a joint conference in December. We've decided, my Institute of Peace Studies and his Global Vision 2000, we're going to have a joint online conference. And we were discussing what it'll be about. And his thing is interfaith eschatology. Eschatology being the science of the ends of things. It's a theological term. It means eschatology is your personal life and death story. So Sophie's just faced her eschatological moment when she died, tragically. The planet is facing a kind of eschatological moment when it does major wars and major conflicts, and some apocalyptic stories say the world is going to have a collective eschatological moment And some people say, you know, it's imminent. I mean, poor people of Gaza are having a apocalyptic moment. So it's closely tied in with the concept of apocalypse. And so we'll be talking about that at a conference which we'll organise. Very nice to talk to Moeen again. He lives in Istanbul, is, you know, involved with the culture of Turkey and the Ottoman heritage there, which produced some amazing philosophers and intellectuals. So we're plotting peace. I'm going to give a talk called The Eschatology of Peace, because that's my kind of angle. The other thing I want to report is I've got arrived in here Sophie's poems, her collected poetry, which I spent some time. This is a picture of her in Edinburgh, actually, looking very happy outside a shop dedicated to esoteric stuff. Her grandfather was, you know, a medical doctor and a Freemason. His father was another theologian who taught at the University of Glasgow. And so in this book, there's loads of photographs. It's got as many photographs as poems. And I went with her, for instance, here's a photo of in an abbey near Southampton. There's a tomb of Admiral Mountbatten of Burma, who lived from 1900 to 1979. He was the last Governor General of India under the British Raj, and a close friend of King Charles III when he was a young boy. Anyway, he's buried in this abbey, Romsey Abbey, which used to be a nunnery outside Southampton, and Sophie and I visited it. And there's a photograph of the tomb with our two silhouettes, shadows. It's just very moving. And she loved that abbey. It's one of the most, it was the largest abbey still surviving in Hampshire. And it was a female nunnery for like nearly 1,000 years. And all the aristocrats of the Anglo-Saxon Wessex monarchy sent their daughters there to study, and it was a place of learning. So this book is quite precious, I think, to anyone that knew Sophie. Here's a picture of me with a dead heron, looking a bit distraught, because I found this dead heron on the 27th of April, which we've calculated is round about the time she was dying. Tragically, nobody knew, and I found this dead heron underneath this tree at the lake here in Protect. And I thought, what? That's a sign. I thought it was about my death, because I was having some health problems. I thought, oh my God, I don't want to die like the heron. But actually it was my daughter, for God's sake. Had I thought about it, I would have gotten a plane and gone and rescued her. So it's just a tragedy. Here's her in the garden with our friend Alex, a druidess in Wiltshire, looking radiant. So anyway, these poems are quite precious, and I got them from her notebooks. This is us in Turkey. We went to Antalya, and we went to Rumi's tomb, the great Sufi who she loved, his poetry, and so anyway, it's a beautiful thing that has now arrived, thank God, in the library here. I'll finish today with a poem from it, if I may. I also want to share that I'm reading this amazing book here. I did some research. It's the best biography of George Orwell. It's the authorised biography. And the writer, Michael Shelden, has gone through all the archives, he's interviewed people that knew him, he's gone to photographs, he's really done an amazing job. And it's fascinating read. George Orwell was an extraordinary man, and that wasn't his name, by the way. No. He was Eric Blair. George Orwell's a pen name, and he took it from a river in Suffolk, the Orwell. I don't know why writers don't write with their real name, but anyway. It's all about his life as a writer, a teacher, a young man. And he went to Eton. I didn't know that before I read this book. He went to Eton, one of the best schools in Britain, private school, as what's called a King's Scholar, because he went to a prep school which was, like a hothouse for young talent, and that was in near Eastbourne, where I used to teach, actually. I didn't teach at that school, but close to, an all-girls private school, and I was head of religious studies there. Anyway, the young boy, he did really well in Latin and classics, and you know, he got offered, of all the kids in Britain, he got one of the, I think there's 50 places a year or something, or maybe 30, and you get free board and lodging, don't have to pay the tuition fees, which are now enormous to go to Eton. And you're a King's Scholar, and this is because of the will of King Henry VI, who set the school up in the 1400s. And George Orwell was one of those boys, which is amazing, really. Only he didn't do very well. He didn't like school very much. He was a rebel, you know. Like me, he was reading Nietzsche in his late teens and starting to smoke and be part of the rebel gang, you know. But he did well enough, and then he graduated, and he then got a job in Burma, of all things. His dad was a...
in the army?
Well, no, he joined the Burmese police force. It was the days when Burma was part of the British Empire, the Raj, it was part of India. And his dad had worked in India as a colonial officer in charge of the opium trade, of all things. The British grew lots of opium in India and sold it to China, and it funded a lot of the Raj. And they had these officers, opium officers, in each department of India to make sure the quality was good. I mean, I don't quite know what the appeal is, but I think it was a thing back in the 19th century. A lot of British poets, writers did their opium dreams and stuff. I think Coleridge wrote some of his great poems on opium. But the trouble is it can get you hooked, I think, and I've never tried it for that reason. And I think when you refine it, it becomes heroin, which is much, much more lethal. So my advice is stay away from drugs. It's ironic that the British were making this trade. I don't think the Chinese have ever forgiven us, and quite rightly too. But anyway, so that was Dad's job. And he thought, well, I'm not going to India, but I'll go to Burma. And he volunteered to train in the police force. So he became a police officer, and because he was an Eton graduate, he got a top placement, and within about 6 months he was running a whole department of Burma with 200,000 people in it, and he was the head of the police, right? And his job was to supervise the locals, who were the actual police force, but he was like the commander of them. And he had to do, if somebody was murdered or killed somebody, they had to investigate. He was responsible for running the jails, the prisons. It was then a death penalty, so he had to go and supervise executions. And it was all a bit grim. And after a couple of years, he realised that actually he was just a little cog in an imperial machine. And the imperial machine didn't care a damn about either the local people or even the people that worked for it. And he rebelled. And he said, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. And he came back to Britain. He resigned his commission, which was, nobody... I mean, his parents were totally against that. Like, you've thrown a job away for life. You could have been, great pension, all that. No, he resigned. He came back to Britain in order to become a writer, which is, I know that it's a risk one takes, right? But and he went to the other end of British society and became a tramp. He became unemployed, and he went and lived with the down and outs in the East End and the slums, and in Paris, washing dishes, and there'd be weeks when he couldn't afford to eat. And then he kept diaries and he wrote it all up, and it became his famous book, Down and Out in Paris and London, living the opposite end, from Eton scholar to tramp. But he had a brilliant mind, and it taught him compassion to mix with the very poor, the hopeless, the homeless, I mean, nowadays there's too many people that are homeless in Britain. He would have a lot of new observations to write about. So anyway, and then he went and he wrote a few novels, and then he went off to Lancashire and wrote The Road to Wigan Pier. He lived with poor working class families, miners, who were living in little cottages, no running water, really difficult, tough lives, ageing prematurely. And he went there sympathetically to write up their life stories and to meet them and become friends, because nobody was interested in them. The elites in London and Windsor and Eton didn't care about these people. They didn't care. So he had a conscience, he had a social conscience. He said, I'm going to do, in a sense, a sort of anthropology of the working classes in Britain, and it became a classic, that one, The Road to Wigan Pier. And now, as if that's not enough, he's gone off to Spain. He said he'd moved to the left because of these experiences, seeing poverty close up and the hopeless lives people had. He said that some kind of socialism is the answer to all this. We've got to have a different way of organising society. We can't let the rich go on running the show. And he was very concerned about the rise of fascism, because by then Hitler was rampaging across Europe and spouting anti-Semitic fascist stuff, and Mussolini and Franco were doing the same. And at a certain point he said, well, I'm going off to Spain to write about the Spanish Civil War, because it was a matter of conscience. He thought you should go and give them a hand. At a certain point you actually have to fight fascism, was his decision. And he went thinking he was going to be a journalist, but he ended up volunteering for the front. And he was quite good as being a soldier. The problem was, and he didn't know anything about all this, the Republic, which was the army he was supporting, the government army, which was being attacked by the fascists under Franco, was riven by factions. And there was like in the Monty Python Palestine liberation sequence, there was the orthodox Marxist-Leninist front soldiers, there was the anarchist soldiers, there was the Stalinist soldiers, there was the Trotskyite soldiers, and they were all at loggerheads. And he ended up working in a unit at the front that was run by something called POOM, which was a Trotskyite faction. And he didn't really care, he just wanted to join the Republican forces, but they were all in different sections. And then in Barcelona, these factions started fighting each other. And it seems to be the Stalinists who were under Stalin who were trying to infiltrate the Republican army and turn it towards a Stalinist direction. And it's just a few years before Stalin had Trotsky executed with a pickaxe in Mexico. So he writes it all up as a first-hand witness. And it's really, really fascinating. I can't praise this book too highly. Michael Shelden, Orwell, the authorised biography, and I haven't finished. I'm really enjoying this. It's my bedtime reading. And it's making me think a lot about, what would Orwell be doing if he was alive now. He'd be writing, that's one thing for sure. But he would be taking a stand, and he would be saying, no, Thomas, you're right, you've got to do some politics as well as write.
And he would be seriously old.
He would be very old too, yeah. No, you'd have to come back as a young man, if you believe in reincarnation. So the other thing I want to say is I've been very active on the Gaza front with my Solomon option. And I've been engrossed in watching the Jeremy Corbyn Gaza Tribunal, which took place over 2 days, Thursday and Friday, I think. And they had about 30 brilliant speakers who, and it was all filmed and recorded, and you can watch it on YouTube. I have to say, hats off to Jeremy and his team. They got some very important witness statements by academics, writers, researchers. There was a professor from Goldsmiths College who spoke. He's created a centre for forensic architecture. And I met someone who is from Goldsmiths doing a PhD there who told me about him recently. And I'd never heard of forensic architecture. What's that? Like forensics is like criminal investigations. Well, yes, that's what forensic architecture is doing. When there's conflict and war zones, they want to map what's happening and who's bombing which bits of which territory, and So there's the normal architecture, is like you build buildings and it's like normal. Forensic is when they're destroying buildings. And in this talk, this guy's a genius, from the University of London, I should add. He's mapped all Gaza and what the Israeli army is doing, piece by piece, demolishing the entire Gaza Strip of all the buildings. And he described how, with detailed maps and forensic research, that seems to be their deliberate plot. They're trying to level the whole of Gaza, as if there's never been anything growing there. They've been destroying the orchards, the gardens, deliberately and systematically. And then the most shocking thing, I think he said in his testimony, which was very, very, very disturbing, is that they're using really powerful bombs to blow up the buildings, and they're doing it as we speak in Gaza City, which is one of the few remaining bits that are still standing.
Going for the high blocks right now, high rises.
Absolutely, they're just taking them down with big buildings and with big bombs. And when they do that, people get buried in the rubble. They don't find all the bodies. And he described in detail to camera how, because they're using such powerful bombs, the human remains are going down and then the building is collapsing on them. And then what the Israelis are doing, and have done in other parts of Gaza, is they're then taking that off and using it to make buildings in Israel. They're using it for hardcore, to put down as foundations. So they're mixing in human bones and human remains into building supplies. And this is like a business that they're doing. And I find this utterly appalling and shocking. And this is why I think the Gaza Tribunal people, I mean, one of the people who spoke as one of the world's foremost genocide scholars, who, is got his finger on the pulse of that and said, yes, beyond a shadow of a doubt, this is genocide. I mean, killing people en masse and then using their remains as hardcore, I mean, that is genocide, right? He's called Dr. Raz Siegel, genocide scholar. And he says there's about 120,000 dead so far in Gaza. And that the figures that were quoted are never, they're not enough because they're not including all the bodies that are buried and destroyed. And they're taking the evidence. It's like with the 9/11 thing, you just take all the evidence away. And a lot of these dead are children. 18,000 kids have died in Gaza. There's a phrase they've coined, unchilding. Gaza's being unchilded. Its children are being erased. So hats off to Jeremy Corbyn for highlighting this and using Parliament as a venue to have this very important meeting, which was filmed. And I recommend people watch it. My old colleague, Professor Richard Falk of Princeton University, I've known him for years. He gave a lecture at the University of London that I chaired years ago when I was first setting up my Peace Institute. He's still going. Well done, Richard. And he's running a thing called the Gaza People's Tribunal, which is meeting in Istanbul, October 23rd to 26th. So I'm sure my friends in Istanbul will go to that. And Richard is a professor of international law. He has been a UN special rapporteur on Gaza before, or in Palestine. And he was able to say, look, this is exactly what's happening here, and this is unacceptable. And he's Jewish, by the way. I mean, so is Raz. I mean, a lot of the people speaking were Jewish. Others were Palestinian. I mean, they're people with active brain cells and conscience and hearts. The other thing I will flag up, and she wasn't speaking, but she was referenced several times, is Francesca Albanese, who's the current Palestinian spokesperson for the UN. She's Italian. She's made a recording on, I think it's on Double Down News. She's talking about the economy of occupation. She's talking about the economics of all this. And she says that the economy of occupation has now moved and shifted gear, and it's become an economy of genocide. And this is extremely worrying. An economy of genocide? What? I'm thinking, what does that mean? So, if you recall, if you've studied the Holocaust. I mean, the Nazi death camps, Auschwitz and places, were economic places. They worked these Jews to death, and they got some products out of them. They made them make stuff which they sold, and they were factories. One of my friends in Israel, Gila Haron, her parents survived Auschwitz. Her mother survived Auschwitz because she spoke French. Jewish girl from Thessalonica, exported out, from Greece to Auschwitz, and she spoke French. And at one point, a factory was being set up by French people, speakers, engineers, near Auschwitz, and they wanted someone to go who could speak French. And they came in the hut and said, anyone here speak French? She volunteered, and that's how she survived the war. She was useful to them. And she eventually escaped to Israel and met Gila's father, who had a similar unbelievable story. So yes, it's an economic thing, and that's what's happening in Gaza. There are companies involved and benefiting from this genocide. Some of the IT companies, the arms weapons companies, things like Elbit, Palantir, Lockheed Martin, they're making the weapons and the missiles. Even Google and Microsoft are involved in the tracking systems for the high-tech drone warfare that they're doing. Now, I think this is wrong, and what Francesca Albanese is saying is, yes, it's wrong. We've got to divest from genocide. The company Hyundai, which makes bulldozers and stuff, is making bulldozers they're using to get this rubble with human remains in, and they're making profits from it. It's a big business. And Volvo is providing buses for the Israeli forces in Gaza.
Caterpillar are also building dozers for it.
We need to work on the economics of peace, is what I'm saying here. And we have to realise that there's blood on these companies that are... I think we shouldn't... Profit shouldn't come at that horrendous a price. We should encourage these companies to invest in the economics of peace instead of the economics of genocide. And this is my point I made in my critique of Das Kapital, which I'm working halfway through a commentary on Das Kapital. Marx never mentions the role of capital in relation to war. He's brilliant at technology and capital formation. That's what Das Kapital is all about. He never mentions military technology as the key thing that creates maximum profits. If you can design a new weapon, a new type of missile or a new type of drone, you've got billions coming in. And that's always been the case ever since the longbow, the crossbow, the gunpowder, machine guns, which were coming in Marx's day, and then right up to tanks and ironclad ships and planes and missiles and now drones. So there's a huge missing gap in Marxist theory around capital and war and profit. And Francesca Albanese is talking about this. She's a genius. The economy of genocide. There are people doing this because they can make profits at it. Well, that to me is completely and utterly wrong as a philosopher. And I would say we have to put ethics first. And there are also universities involved. She talks about it. So anyway, look at Double Down News, and her 20-minute talk is awesome. So that's all kind of interesting stuff. The other thing I want to say is I'm also peace officer of the Council of British Druid Orders. Some people know that, others don't. Now changing my hat slightly. I've got many hats, and my daughter was a member of my Peace Druids Order. I'm the Peace Druid of Europe and Britain, and that's where I have the Peace Sword, which is in the other room, with the words for peace on the blade. And Druids, I think they're really important and precious. They were the ancient wisdom holders of the Celtic world. We've been around since 10,000 BC, and we have a council which meets, every term more or less in London or elsewhere. And I just did a report to that, a digital report to the council about, peace work. I should also mention, of course, the flotilla that's on the way to Gaza, the Sumud flotilla, heroic 50 ships, different nations. It's being augmented. Mandela's grandson is on there. They're using non-violence to try and break this iron grip by Israel. I mean, Israel is wrong to be using violence in this way on Gaza, in my opinion. I'm a great lover of Judaism in its pure form, but not this kind of mass-killing, genocidal Judaism. They ought to know better because it was done to them, and you don't do it to other people. You should know how terrible it is. So I'm also reading the life story of Maimonides, who was the greatest philosopher of Judaism. He defined the 13 things you have to agree if you're going to become a believer in Judaism. He was from Cordoba, which is a city I love well in southern Spain. And he was a great philosopher. He was a lover of Aristotle. He knew Aristotle inside out. And he was trying to reconcile it with the biblical tradition. And it's a masterpiece, this biography. It's just come out. It's a huge book. He was a believer in reason. Maimonides believed that logic, and this is my book on the logic of peace, quotes him in the chapter on Judaism and the logic of peace. Peace is preferable to war, always, said Aristotle, and said Maimonides. You can rationalise and work out a reconciliation. He worked for Saladin, the great Islamic hero who reconquered Jerusalem from the Crusaders. He was one of his physicians. And he was head of the Jewish community in Cairo. And he wrote commentaries on the Talmud and the whole Jewish legal canon, trying to explain it all. He was also very interested in prophecy and prophetics and what is prophetic intelligence. And as a Druid, this is something that interests me, and I think he was at a very high level of intellectual work, Maimonides. And yes, he's talking about what is, the 13 qualities. Now, he would absolutely be appalled at what's going on in Gaza. That this is un-Jewish, this is un-Judaic, this is contrary to right reason and contrary to everything he believed in as a philosopher. There's nothing that what Likud and Netanyahu have done is rational. So Maimonides is definitely worth studying for this, if you don't believe me. I mean, he is the authority on Jewish philosophy. And they ought to study him a bit more, in my opinion, and stop doing their mass killings. Anyway, I've said all this in my report to Cobdo as a Druid intellectual. I had a dream. I just want to finish. I had a dream the other night. One does, doesn't one? And in this dream, I was given a word that was revolutionary and would change the world, and it was like the secret of peace, right? And it was an alternative word to psychoanalysis. Because, a lot of what I do as a philosopher is to try and drill down into the deep emotional traumas people feel and how to heal them and cure them. To me, philosophy is a form of therapy. And analysis was a technical term in Platonic and Aristotelian philosophy for healing someone. You do analysis to set something free. Lysis meant loosening, and it meant ana is again, so to loosen up something or a situation. And it's used in mathematics. To analyse an equation is to work it out. You analyse something. And psychoanalysis is you analyse the twisted convolutions of the psyche and you set it free. That's the point of why Freud coined that term. Anyway, it was given to me as a word that what we need here, because we love psychoanalysis, but it's become a sort of clique and it's a specialised language and there are different schools. No, we need God